see you. I'm Nicky Campbell. Welcome to The Big Question. Today we're live from Leister Grammar School. Welcome, everybody, to The Big Questions. Now, on Tuesday, Mrs May held talks at Downing Street with her opposite number in Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. Increasing trade and investment with Israel was high on the agenda. The day before, the Knesset, Israel's parliament, passed a bill legalising settlements on privately owned Palestinian land on the West Bank, in direct contradiction to a UN Security Council resolution. Mrs May was clear that Britain opposes settlement activity and believes the two-state solution is the best way to bring peace to the region. Should we trade with Israel now the settlements have been recognised? Well, I've been doing debates on this issue for 30 years now, and it's never that quiet. I know it's very, very impassioned on both sides. We shall attempt to proceed in a civilised direction. Rivka from War on Want. Many will say, are you serious? Come on. We have trade deals with Saudi Arabia, with China, with Russia, with the United Arab Emirates, some of the worst human rights abusers on the planet. None of them a democracy like Israel is. So how can you possibly justify this?
Well, I think there's a major issue with the UK. The UK should be putting human rights and international law at the centre of all of its trade negotiations with all countries.
Should we stop trading with all those countries?
I think it's a question to be brought up. I think we can't talk about trade without talking about human rights and international law, and that's why it's important for the UK to take action right now, move beyond words, and suspend its trade relations with Israel because of its systematic violations of international law.
If we stop trading with countries with human rights abuses at a time when we need friends, we'd go out of business.
Well, I think what happens when you continue trading with human rights abusing regimes like Israel, you're basically incentivizing human rights abuse, and you're giving a green light to say that violations of international law, doing things like building settlements, demolishing Palestinian homes is okay. You know, we might say on the side, well, we don't like it when you do that, as Theresa May did, but incentivizing them with trade, and especially things like the arms trade. The UK government has approved over £100 million worth of arms exports to Israel in 2016 alone. Those arms are used in violence against Palestinians. So it's a real double standard to say no settlements on the one hand, but then to be giving arms to the country that's building them.
You referred to Israel. Paul, morning Paul, chairman of the Zionist Federation, former tank commander with the IDF. We heard there's a couple of things I need to ask you, then we'll throw it out. We want to hear from the audience, of course, hands going up already. But Rivka referred to, in unequivocal terms there, Israel as a human rights abuser. How would you respond to what she said there?
Well, that needs to be qualified. Israel, certainly by Freedom House, has recognised Israel as the only free country in the Middle East. It has a very strong democracy. It has a Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is not subservient to the executive. It will look at this legislation and it will decide whether it's legal or not. There is a huge social housing crisis amongst the Palestinians and amongst the Israelis, and these towns that are expanding need to expand. So it is a controversial issue, and you can disagree. But at the same time, if the UK disagreed with every country, with every political decision, certainly it wouldn't be dealing with China, it wouldn't be dealing with India over Kashmir, it wouldn't be dealing with Turkey over northern Cyprus, and the opposite would be true. It's not like Spain would cease dealing with the UK over Gibraltar, or Argentina would cease dealing with the UK over the Falkland Islands. What we need is to understand, to put this into perspective, that the settlements are an issue, but they are one issue since 1967 that needs to be dealt with in a much larger framework of a peace agreement, where the Palestinians require and they want to build a home and a state for themselves more than they want to destroy and boycott Israel. When that priority changes, then peace can be achieved.
Let's go to the audience first off. Right behind Paul, yeah. Good morning.
Certainly.
We need a microphone. It's coming. This gentleman here. Yeah, go on, sorry.
We're in an age where Trump wants to build walls and impose travel bans and impose restrictions on people based on their religion or their identity. And surely what we want to be doing is reaching out to countries, reaching out to different communities.
To Israel, for example.
And to Israel, and to engage and to challenge constructively and to say this is wrong, but also to say we recognise you're a democracy, we want to work with you, And we want to build those trade links, build those partnerships, improve relationships for all the peoples in the world, rather than being isolationist.
OK, and right along there, yeah.
Yeah, you keep saying it's a democracy. It's not a democracy. It's a democracy similar to what South Africa was in the apartheid time. You know, so many people are disfranchised. They don't have any say in the running of Israel, and they keep saying it's a democracy.
It has women's rights, it has trade union rights, it has gay rights. That's one angle on this.
I mean, it's the biggest concentration camp in the world. It's almost a prison.
Let's get a Paul, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah,
I need to be very careful putting the points back and forth so that it's fair for
You have to be
everyone.
very careful with the terminology that you use, and that's hugely harmful for what is recognized internationally as a democracy with, as we said, we have all the minorities as heads of Supreme Court, as doctors, as heads of hospitals, heads of universities, minorities from across the board, Arab, Druze, Christian, and this is recognized across the Middle East as a beacon for what could be seen as a free country that all the rest of the countries around can look and see, this is what we want to have. This is the beacon. This is your ultimate.
Let me, gentleman there, first of all, because there's a point that you made, our first speaker there. So what's your name?
Leon.
Leon. The point Leon made, I want to put to you, Professor Harwash, which is an interesting and many would think a very significant one. First off, though, Hi, morning, how are you?
Good morning, very well, thank you. I mean, I'm just shocked that you've reduced the Palestinian question and the crisis in the Middle East to a housing problem. I think you said that it's a housing problem that exists, you know, for Israelis and Palestinians, and you are expanding these towns because there's a housing crisis that needs to be addressed. It's the continued colonisation of Palestine. You're demolishing houses. You're chasing and removing, and let's call it out for what it is. It's ethnic cleansing that's going on in these areas that have gone on for decades.
OK, I'm going to put that point to Tom.
Just come back.
OK, yeah, go on, Leon, you come back on that. Yeah?
I think it's really important to have a debate, but we have to be so careful with our language, because we want to have a civilised debate here, and using words like concentration camps and ethnic cleansing is really offensive, not just to Jews, but to all people who have actually suffered that extreme genocide and persecution. So please don't use language like concentration camps, because it's not a concentration camp.
But it's a fact, isn't it? It is a fact. All these people have been disfranchised. I mean, the building settlements, the Palestinian houses are being demolished.
Professor Harwash, let me put a point to you, as Leon did make, about, you know, trade means links, means diplomacy, means influence, means you can make progress. OK, Zimbabwe, we have the sanctions on Zimbabwe. We have absolutely zero influence there. We cannot help the people who are suffering egregiously at the hands of Mugabe and his thugs. The only way we can get to Zimbabwe is through the back channels of South Africa, and that's difficult enough. Would you want to create a situation where we have no influence, no trading links with Israel?
You said you've been covering this topic for 30 years, and during that period, the number of settlers in the West Bank increased from something like 100,000 to now 600,000, 700,000 people. It will reach 1 million unless we do something to stop it. Because if people really are interested in peace, you need to look at the situation of the Palestinians who didn't choose to be occupied, to have their land taken, to have another state created in our homeland. And I speak as a Palestinian. We didn't choose any of that. So what this is about the rights of the Palestinian people. Paul talked about housing and building houses. It's just ludicrous. These houses are built for only one type of person, a Jewish Israeli, not for Palestinians. If Israel was serious about solving a housing crisis, why doesn't it open the settlements out to Palestinians to live on them? But even better, not build on someone else's land.
Paul.
It has never been Palestinian land. You've never had a state, and we want to help you create a state. But prior to 1967, it was owned by the Jordanians, and the Jordanians will not allow you to own your own land. And prior to that, it was the British, and prior to that was the Ottomans. This land is called disputed for that very fact.
Do we Palestinians exist as a people?
We want to help you create a state.
Do Palestinians exist as a people, do you think? Well, do you recognize us as a people?
Absolutely, and you should have a state, and you should live alongside us, and you should put down your arms.
Why don't you put pressure on the Israeli government?
Let me intervene there.
To leave our land.
Let me intervene right there. Tom, is this not the situation now with the settlements having been legitimised in the Knesset, is that not put a, somebody mentioned a wall there, has that not put a massive wall up to the possibility of a two-state solution? Massively counterproductive.
Well, this is a proposed law, and we'll see if it gets through the Supreme Court, because Israel does have quite strong checks and balances on its democracy. But I think that it's kind of very concerning that we think that the presence of Jewish people in the West Bank in some way negates their being able to be a Palestinian state. Why is it assumed that this Palestinian state has to be Jew-free? Why couldn't a Palestinian state have a Jewish minority just as Israel has an Arab and Muslim minority? I mean, you know, I don't think we can criminalise an entire community just because they've ended up on the wrong side of an armistice line. And the fact is, as we said, there are about 500,000 people there. They're not going anywhere. So I think it's better that we learn for the two sides to be able to accept a minority within one another's countries.
Rivka, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, I think it's important for us to recognise that the settlements, like people have referred to, it's been a policy of the State of Israel for decades now. And the reason why settlements exist in the West Bank is not because they ended up on the wrong side of the armistice line. It's a policy of expansion and colonization, as somebody has mentioned. And it's against international law, and that's undisputed, and it's against UK policy.
Would you boycott, as a consumer, products from Israel?
Absolutely.
Do you feel
Absolutely.
How do you feel when you use Google because they have a major research and development centre in Israel? How do you feel about that?
I think it's less about an individual consumer, though. Of course, people should make the choices they make.
But you just said you definitely would do that. I mean, if you had a list of choices, would you radically transform your habits?
I think the important thing is for the UK government to take action in line with its own policy. So the UK foreign policy recognizes settlements as illegal under international law. It's important for the UK to act on that policy. You know, we've talked a little bit about engagement. You raised the question of whether the UK would have more influence through engagement. If the viewers remember Margaret Thatcher's days in relations with South Africa, the policy was constructive engagement. Now, in retrospect, it's recognized that that actually prolonged apartheid, and that actually allowed apartheid to deepen. Constructive engagement as a policy was rubbished after apartheid fell, finally, because of economic pressure like sanctions. So I think it's important for us to recognize that as an important tool that the UK government has, and it's time, again, to move beyond words and condemnations and into action.
Paul, and then we'll come to more audience in just a second. Paul, just come back on that.
Yeah, I'd just like to bring something constructive into it, and the blame game is not going to get us to a peace deal. And I think I'd like to see the Palestinian Authority take more control over its own people and over the peace process and over wanting a Palestinian state so much more than it wants to destroy and denigrate an Israeli state. I think there is goodwill around the world and in Israel to help you do that. But you must remember that with all the wars that came in, that Israel had to defend itself. It has given back the Sinai. It has given back Gaza.
What about that
it is
gentleman's
ready
point?
to concede.
What about that gentleman's point that
Yes.
a proportion of our audience,
Yes.
a proportion of our audience, I'm just going to put that to him.
Sure.
The proportion of our audience will be wondering, and it's
Yes.
the point represented by that gentleman, taking land from people, land that is not yours. How do you respond to that?
Firstly, this is disputed territory with Palestinians living on and Jews living on. Please allow me to speak.
No,
Please allow me to speak.
It isn't disputed territory.
When
it's illegally occupied.
when the Israelis left Gaza in
illegally
each and
occupied.
Let him answer,
every
please.
inch of Gaza,
I'll come
all the
to you.
Palestinian land, gave it back and said, create a state, we're leaving you greenhouses, we're leaving you businesses. What was created was a mini-terrorist state with only the development of bombs and warfare. And the problem is, if Israel does the same thing immediately and just retracts from the West Bank, we're going to have the same extremist ideology coming out of there. We cannot trust and rely without a strong security presence. We cannot trust and rely on these states like Hamas to automatically become democratic and allow gays and Christians to flourish. That's not going to happen.
Professor Hawash, I'll be with you. You will have the next voice on the front row, and Ibrahim will be in as well, and Tom will be back. First off, though, more audience comments. Leon, you've had a good say. Let me go to the gentleman at the back. Good morning.
Good morning. It is important to realise, I believe, after the United Kingdom has voted to leave the European Union, that and other factors coming into the 21st century, that Britain is no longer the global player in the world that it was in the post-colonial period after 1945 at the end of the Second World War.
So what should we do?
The diminishing power, I believe, that that we haven't got a responsibility to police the world in the same way, and we haven't got the capability
So
either
what do we do about
economically.
Israel?
So we shouldn't boycott them in any sense at all, because in respect of trading with places like Dubai, trading with places like Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, even trading with Pakistan, Israel is democratic and free, as the gentleman said.
Well, there is a blasphemy law. Take your point. A
Freedom
point made
House.
earlier on and expressed well by yourself as well. Yeah, go on.
Good morning, Nicky.
Morning.
My concern, this question is about trade, and my concern is that the Brexit vote will lead to our leaders, Prime Minister May and others, only giving criticisms of countries that are abusing human rights behind their hands, whispering it instead of saying it forcefully.
Because we need friends.
Because we need friends. And so I worry that that ethical foreign policy that Robin Cook wished for is not going to happen because we're in no position to criticise others.
Realpolitik, is there such a thing as an ethical foreign policy?
I think there should be.
Professor Hawash.
Yeah,
We had a point there from Paul. You wanted to come back?
In the age of Trump, it seems that trade trumps human rights, and that is something we should all oppose, and oppose very strongly. Paul talked about the Palestinians should take more control of their people and so on. Well, I'll just give you an example. Under the Oslo Accords, an area called Area C, which is the most fertile part of Palestine, Area C is currently under Israeli security and administrative control. It was to be passed over. It isn't being passed over. In fact, Naftali Bennett, and a number of Israeli ministers say it should be annexed. So they actually have no interest in a Palestinian state emerging. Naftali Bennett only yesterday, advising Prime Minister Netanyahu, who is going to Washington next week, said 2 words you should not use. You should not utter 2 words. Palestinian and state. Okay? So if there is no Palestinian state, I would very much like to hear from Paul and others what the solution is, when there are almost an equal number of Palestinians and Jews in that land.
What's the solution, and how strategically important do you believe that Israel is to this country?
It's very strategically important in terms of, we've got a growing high-tech economy in Israel and certainly in things like counter-terror. But I think that that's by the by, and I think that the issue here is the moral issue. It is the issue of human rights. I think we're being very selective in how we're talking about human rights. I mean, War on Want is being particularly selective, that they're targeting Israel for boycotts. They say they care about international law. I don't hear them calling for boycotts of other countries who have got similar issues. But on the issue of Palestinian human rights, it seems that many people in this audience are more angry about the building of Jewish houses in the West Bank than they are about the abuse of Palestinian rights by Palestinians. If your starting point is Palestinian human rights, wouldn't you call out the Palestinian Authority for its extrajudicial killings of Palestinians, for torture of Palestinians, for harassment of journalists, for detention without trial? And yet we hear silence on all of this. The focus is exclusively on finding reasons to boycott and demonize the world's only Jewish state.
I think we need to somehow...
Ibrahim, we haven't heard from Ibrahim yet. Will you remind me?
A point where we're talking about Palestinian rights and freedom. What the other side is talking about is simply sustaining the status quo.
Okay.
And the status quo has led us to a situation where there's a lot of unhappiness and anger and abuse of the Palestinians by the Israeli state. We need to be free for there to be peace in Palestine.
Ibrahim Margaret, do you, from the MCB, Muslim Council of Britain, do you recognise Israel's right to exist?
Within internationally recognized borders, yes. I think we have brought Israel into our embrace far more than I would have liked to see. They are participants in the football Euro competitions. They are participants in the Eurovision Song Contest. We don't even share a border with them. So in response to your point about in response to your point about isolating Israel, we have actually remained in at least cultural and political contact with them. The important thing here is international law has to be applied equally right across the board.
Absolutely.
It is not about Israel, whether it's Saudi Arabia, Pakistan was mentioned, the Gulf states were mentioned, whichever state, China, whichever state it is. If we as human beings who subscribe to international law fail to apply the UN resolutions equally across the board, what are we showing to the world? That democracy is selective, that powerful nations will pick on the weaker nations, that self-interest and national interests will trump all the other global interests. So the question here is, are we applying the same yardstick to measure all these different behaviors of the governments? We've gone into Iraq, we've gone into Libya, because their leaders, corrupt and dictatorial as they were, flaunted UN security resolutions.
Okay.
How many resolutions has Israel overlooked over time?
Well,
so
listen,
as long as...
we have to leave it there. We have other things to debate, but your point came across loud and clear. Not that everybody watching is going to agree with it. It's a perilous line, this debate, always. But I think that was pretty calm. I think that was pretty simple. Do you reckon? Do you reckon, everyone? Yeah? OK, let's do the next one. If you have something to say about that debate, log on to bbc.co.uk/thebigquestions. Follow the link to where you can join in the discussion online, contribute on Twitter. Also live this morning from Leister Grammar School, has the time come to raise taxes to cover social care?